So I just got in my jack pad adapters so I don't crush those jack pads on the bottom of my Mini. So the first thing we're going to do is jack up the left side. I'm going to be changing the brake pads and the brake pad sensor that's on the left front tire of my Mini. You will find links in the description to the brake pads, the brake pad sensor, as well as the jack pad adapter. As you can see, I've got the car jacked up and I have a floor jack underneath the subframe for safety. Here is what the brake pad wear sensor looks like out of the package when you purchase it. Now I am going to be changing my brake pads and my brake wear sensor, but in the case that you have found that your brake pads are actually in good shape and you just want to replace that sensor, what you want to do is you need to get behind that trim underneath your wheel well. So the first thing I did was I pulled out that little push button trim connector. Then there are some 8mm screws that are holding the trim onto the underbody of the car. So you're going to have to get at all of those. And that piece of plastic I just touched, you just want to remove enough of those screws so that you can bend back that piece of trim. And the connection for your brake pad wear sensor is behind that. So again, I've got my 8mm. I'm going to speed things up here. And again, I'm just taking off enough of these trim screws so that I can bend back that kind of like that water shield in the wheel well. So in total, I ended up removing that first trim clip and then 2 screws so that I could bend back the plastic and gain access to where the brake pad wear sensor is connected underneath. All right, so I've removed enough where I was able to kind of pull this forward, and the strut is kind of holding the plastic out. All right, so let's see if I can get an angle on this for you to see. So if I pull this back, you can see where that wire harness connector is. So we're gonna remove the one on the left. I'm just gonna snap it out of its connections, and then we can unplug this front brake. Go. Now, if you're having a little trouble unconnecting that plug, take a look at the new one. You'll see where there's a little tab where you have to lift off the female end in order to slide out that male end. Then what I did was I got in there with a small flathead screwdriver, and that made really quick work of unplugging that sensor. Now you're just going to follow that wire, and there will be another 2 clips that are just holding it in, and you just really need to muscle it. There's no trick. Just give it some muscle, yank it out of those connectors. And this next one, this one was a little bit more difficult. I pulled on it a little bit. I wiggled it around with a screwdriver, but I finally got in there with a needle nose and just kind of got a really good grip on it, and then just popped that thing off. That was the best way to get that one out. All right. Now that takes care of all of the clips that are holding your brake pad wear sensor line. Now what you want to do is we're going to get in there with a needle nose, and we want to pull the actual sensor out. You're just going to pull it straight back. Now you can see I used a little mini flashlight to show where I was aiming, and then I wiggled my hand a little bit, and that really helped that brake pad wear sensor slide out. Again, if your brakes are fine and you just have a faulty sensor that you're replacing, be sure to look closely. There's a little metal clip that actually stayed inside the brake. So you need to get your pliers back in there, and here you can see what that little metal clip looks like. You don't want that left in there. Next, I'm just going to spray everything down with some brake cleaner, and at this point you could push the piston back with a flathead screwdriver and slide your new brake pad wear sensor in place. But what I'm going to be doing, I am going to loosen the caliper by using a screwdriver to push that piston in, but I am going to be changing the brake pads next. So do this very gently, and then you will find that that caliper is now nice and loose, and it'll be much easier to remove. Here I'll be using a 17 millimeter crescent wrench, and I just kind of tap it over the nut that's holding that slider bolt. You do have to use a second wrench while you're unscrewing those slider bolts. Those are only tensioned to 17 foot-pounds. So again, with a crescent wrench holding one side of it, you should be able to very easily work off that slider bolt. We're going to use the same process on that bottom caliper slider bolt. Once we get these loosened, we can spin them off by hand, and then we can take off that caliper. And I do find that's the best way to change the brake pads. Sometimes you can swing it up like I do on my Tahoe or Pilot, but I like to just remove it entirely to put these new brake pads on. Now, just like any other brake job, you want to be careful when you move that caliper, and I'm going to speed things up a little bit here, but what I'm doing is I'm just taking a wire coat hanger and hanging it on the strut and then just sliding it out of the way, but I don't want any tension on that brake line. With that brake caliper safely hung out of the way, I'm just using a small flathead to gently pop out these brake pads, and I'm going to inspect them to see how worn they are. Now, as is often the case, the outside brake pad actually looks like it's got a good amount of life left on it. But the brake pad that typically does a lot of the work is that inside brake pad. So I did need to use a slightly larger screwdriver. And if we look at this one, we didn't damage the disc at all, but this one is worn pretty well, and the sensor did do its job. You can see there's not much left on this brake pad. So now, because I am seeing a little bit of difference in wear, and actually it's always a good practice anyways, what I am going to do again is clean everything with brake cleaner. But before I put in the new brake pads, I am going to go ahead and pull out those sliders and give them some new grease just to make sure that the new brakes slide nicely. Now, with the front brake pads that I bought, and again, I'll put a link in the description, there was a little packet of brake grease in there. But if you don't have any, you should pick up some brake and caliper grease, which is specific for this type of project. So I'm going to do the bottom as well as the top. And you'll notice I do have this sped up a little bit, but I'm putting grease all around that slider, and then when I put it back, you do want to make sure that the dust boot kind of snaps over. Now what I'm doing is I am putting a little bit more, and this is my own brake and caliper grease, and so I'm putting it in those grooves where the brake pads are going to rest. So that'll help those slide in and move freely in the brakes. And now we are ready to install the new brake pads. And I'm going to do the inside brake pad first, but we do want to put in that new brake pad wear sensor. So you can see the groove where it goes. Again, this is the inside brake pad. And the way I got it in there was using my two thumbs. I just kind of jammed it up, and you'll hear it click into place. Now you're going to want to put some grease, brake pad and caliper grease, on the two tabs, top and bottom. That'll help you get these in place. Now, I couldn't get a very good angle for the camera on that inside brake pad, but I'm going to show you how I get the outside brake pad on, and they both go in the same way. So again, I'm putting some grease on those tabs. And the tabs do have a little spring clip on them so that they really hold in those clip points pretty well. So the technique I found that works well is you want to put the brake pad in place, and then you kind of want to push on it to kind of compress that clip. And while you're pushing it in, you can see me pushing on it with my thumb and then my hand. Then I use a little flathead screwdriver, and then it'll click into place. At this point, we are in the home stretch of this project. Both brake pads are seated nicely, and we can now slide that caliper back into place. So remember, the first thing you're going to want to do is, well, you can see I'm getting that hanger out of the way that I used to hang it up on the strut. Then I'm going to carefully bring it down. Again, be careful with that brake line. You don't want to damage it. And you need to slide that brake pad wear sensor wire through that hole in the caliper. And I do want to be very delicate with that wire because I would hate to damage it and then only find out that my car will not reset because I damaged that brake pad wear sensor while installing it. Now, with that wire threaded through the caliper, I was ready to slide that caliper into place, only to find out that with the width of the new brake pads, my piston was still sticking out too far. So I had to reverse the process, thread that brake pad wire sensor back through the caliper so that I could get a C-clamp and very carefully push that piston back down into place. So just to make sure I didn't damage the caliper or the brake line, essentially, I did hang it back up on a strut. Here I'm putting the old brake pad on the caliper, or on the piston, I should say. Then using a C-clamp, I am just going to very gently push down on that brake pad and very gently push that piston back down into that caliper. So here you can see me, I'm doing this very slowly. You are moving. This is hydraulic, so you do want to give that fluid time to get pushed back up into the master cylinder. And once I feel like I've got it down deep enough, then I'll just take everything back out, get that hanger out of the way, and slide that caliper into place. If you order the same brake pads I used, you will find that they come with a new set of slider bolts. These slider bolts do have thread lock applied to them, so I do recommend using them. And there's going to be one for the top, one for the bottom. So you're just going to line up that caliper, thread them in by hand, and then we're going to get our torque wrench and set the torque on these to 17 foot-pounds. Next, we want to plug in our new brake pad wear sensor, but the first thing I'm going to do is clip it into the proper clips. And I'm going to speed up the process here a little bit because this is just the reverse of how we removed the old brake pad wear sensor. So once we get all those clips connected and get the new sensor plugged in, then what we can do is push that plastic off the strut and then replace the two screws that we removed from that wheel well cowling and that trim clip that we removed. And with regard to that plastic trim, I only removed 2 screws as well as that trim clip that plugs in behind the strut. So here's a little better angle, and I just need to jam that in with my thumb, and that holds it in place. Now we have everything back together, and now I'm actually throwing on my winter tires because it is December, and I should have done this a couple weeks ago. Now I always apply a little bit of anti-seize before I screw on the lug nuts with my air tool. I do take these off regularly, and it just makes things easier. And I did set the torque on all lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. So once you get that done, you've completed the project on the outside of the car, but we're not done yet. We still need to reset the computer on the inside. So without starting the car, you do want to hit the start button and just get the auxiliary power on. So once you do that, you will see the brake system warning pop up, which has been popping up for a long time on my car. So I'm just going to wait a few seconds for that message to disappear. Now I will press and hold that button on the odometer. And it will ask me if I want to reset, and I will press and hold again. And then do I want to reset? Yes, I do. So I will then press and hold again, and then it will reset in progress. Now, what you will see in this case is it said reset unsuccessful. I didn't roll tape while doing it, but it did that because my parking brake was on. So I released my parking brake, then I did it again, and it worked successfully. And just to prove that to you, because I didn't get it on film, we will go over to the vehicle info, go over to vehicle status, check on the service required, and the front brake pads is no longer showing up. So just proving that the reset was successful once I had my parking brake off. Thanks for watching. Check out the description for more information and hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos.